Go ahead.
Thank you. Now I have the power. Okay. So thank you everybody for coming to the School of Nursing's Faculty and Staff Professional Development Committee's Lunch and Learn series. This is Dr. Susan Deane, Associate Professor in the School of Nursing with us. And she is actually going to talk about a really important topic today, which is how to provide effective, constructive feedback to our students, which I think we all are challenged with sometimes. So I'm going to turn the screen and the microphone over to Dr. Deane, and hopefully we can all take away a lot of really great things from this today.
Well, okay. Can everybody see that? Oops.
Got it.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, welcome. Providing effective, constructive feedback. I want to give a little background information here. I attended the 2016 NLN Nurse Educator Summit in Orlando last fall. And Dr. Susan LaParelle from the Montana State University actually did this presentation on effective, constructive feedback. And so I've been chatting with her and emailing her back and forth, and she certainly gave me permission to share this and share her techniques with you, but also I want you to be aware of that this whole thing that she has developed is really about a change in philosophy about providing constructive feedback. So if you just kind of hold on to that thought as we go through this, we can talk more about it at the end. And I can also share some personal anecdotal things that I've used from her presentation. So really my goal here today is just to leave here with some practical strategies that will help you feel better equipped when you deliver constructive feedback. Because I know we all have our moments where we just don't know how to say something nice about something that's not so nice. Both in verbal and in written feedback. So for most of us, I think providing student feedback can be daunting. It's exasperating. How do you do that? It's great when you have the A student, let's face it, or the student in clinical who does everything perfect. It's great. But when you do have to provide constructive feedback to students, it really it's very time consuming. And how do you put the right words in? And is the student going to hear or read what your intentions are? And so really the challenges that Susan LaParelle has talked about is really about sharing constructive feedback about behavior and performance can really cause, we know, faculty angst. And she has done a lot of papers and research actually on student incivility, and negative feedback has been linked to student incivility and other inappropriate student behavior. And really what her philosophy is, or what she has adapted and she's kind of brought in folks that she works with, is that faculty really are key in establishing a culture in which students learn to welcome, believe it or not, welcome constructive feedback. Because we all know that students think that we kind of sit up all night deciding who we're going to pick on tomorrow and get them out. So the joke is, how are nursing instructors like gardeners? Because they try to weed us out. And so that's been a long-standing, I think, feeling a long time in nursing education anyway, maybe not in other professions. But I think part of getting that feedback has a negative connotation for students. So I kind of looked into some of the reasons why. There's been some researches on feedback and why students do not use feedback or underutilize the feedback that they receive from their faculty. And these were the four biggest areas, or the top areas that students identified. First was timeliness. They felt that the feedback they received sometimes was not useful because they were already going on to their next clinical assignment or their next paper or whatever other assignments that they have. So once they get the feedback, they're already working on their next assignment. So that was actually probably one of the top things that they identified as a reason why they did not use feedback. The other reason they felt that they didn't use the feedback is because the way it was delivered. It was just too difficult to understand. It was like too much and way above what they needed or were able to process. And then they talked about the emotional impact of feedback, is that students sometimes don't see the same things that we see. And maybe they feel that they've put a lot of work into it. And when they get feedback that is not what they expect, they get emotional about it. They get angry. They get, they're self-deflated, all of those kind of emotions. And then they figure, why should I continue to do this? I'll just do my work, I'll get my B's and C's, and I'll pass. And then interesting, I thought, was past experiences with feedback. Some of the research is out there that implies that some of the students really never got feedback. When we were talking about the 20-year-olds that came from high school, and maybe they were really good students, and it was interesting in a couple of the qualitative studies that students said, all I've ever got for feedback, whether it was a B+ or an A- or an A, was, oh, good paper, good job. And that was it. So once they start getting feedback, they really didn't know what to do with it and how to decipher it. So really what happens then is that many times we're not on the same page. And then that's when our actions as faculty can be implied that we're malicious or we're arbitrary, we're not sticking to the same thing, we make up rubrics in our head. So again, receiving and sending mixed messages. So what Susan Lou-Perrell does is that we kind of step back and do a self-reflection of what kind of feedback are we providing our students, and what do we really want by providing feedback to our students? What's the outcome? And so we kind of know that, but what do the students know that? So really, if you look at the reasons why students don't use feedback to improve, there's kind of this mistrust that happens, is that, she says this or he says this in my feedback, but I'm not seeing that. I've worked hard on this paper, or I'm doing everything I should be doing and I'm not getting good grades. So that broken trust really means that that's where we have to start. So the philosophy here is that giving feedback is a process that starts on the first day of class before any feedback is even required. And that's where the building of the trust begins, on that first day. Now, Dr. Lou-Perrell is a professor at Montana State University at the College of Nursing in their pre-licensure BSN program. And really what she and her colleagues started to do is kind of looking at the entire feedback process, how they give it, when they give it, is it face-to-face, on Blackboard, on Moodle, wherever, and really start to feel that the trust was really key in providing that foundation. So basically, we're going to go through 3 overall arching strategies for delivering feedback more effectively. So the first thing is to establish a culture early in which students learn to welcome feedback. So in her class, on the first day of class, and these are all, I said, pre-licensure nursing program, nursing students, she asked the students, and her colleagues asked the students, as a show of hands, the first question is, how many of you are hoping to be mediocre nurses? Well, you can imagine that the students are really reluctant at this part because they're not quite sure, is this a trick question, what? And of course, nobody raises their hand. And then the second question is, how many of you are hoping to be highly competent nurses? So of course, everybody raises their hand. So basically what they do is they have further discussions regarding feedback and what the role of the feedback is. So and I know this is a lot of words, and I usually don't put this many words on a PowerPoint, but I wanted to have you have the opportunity to look at this and provide the examples that she provided. So she uses examples such as, let's talk about the role feedback has in your professional development. Or I would like to talk to you about the role of trust in giving and hearing feedback. This is probably my favorite one. I trust that you want my feedback to help you achieve your goal, and therefore I will honor that trust by sharing my observations. And then I ask that you trust that my sole purpose in sharing both positive and constructive feedback is to help achieve your goal. And of course, in these discussions, they want to steer away from negative connotations. The big thing is not using criticism, the word criticism. The big thing is using feedback. And that's a whole, probably a culture shift for students and faculty. So when later on, that's the first day, and later on as instances come up, when they're giving feedback, the first thing they do is say, remember the first day of class when we talked about the role of trust in giving feedback. I have some feedback to share with you now that might be difficult to hear. Please know I'm sharing it to help you meet your goal of being a competent nurse. Basically, her and her colleagues, they have said that this has been a game changer for them, and that students now come to them asking for feedback, and that they finally know what to do with the feedback. Strategies for delivering feedback more effectively. The second one is get ready for your game day. And so practice, practice, practice. So we really have to kind of practice giving constructive feedback. And if we're not sure about constructive feedback, is maybe have a colleague look at it and say, what do you think about this example of giving somebody feedback? I know I was taught, and I don't know how many other people learned about the sandwich effect, is that you give good feedback and then you kind of put something in there that's not so good if they're not doing well, but then you always end on a positive note. And it was interesting to read some articles as well as looking at this kind of philosophy, is that are we really being straightforward with the student? Are we sending mixed messages? Oh, you're doing good, you're not doing good, you're doing good. And so as hard as it may seem, constructive feedback probably needs to be done or given more frequently, and to identify good examples or good work, as well as areas where they need improvement. And we control the setting. You control the setting. Choose time and place and words effectively. Reread it. It's the same thing about sending an email. Always read the email the second time before you push send. We put in that documentation, if you're documenting feedback or providing feedback, is that there's that reminder about trust and mean what you say and say what you mean. And that's avoiding that sugarcoating that they were talking about with that sandwiching effect of good, bad, and then good. And also anticipate some incivility. At first, students find it very difficult or can find it very difficult to accept what you're saying, that they need an improvement when they don't have the insight sometimes that we do. But I think it's important to be honest and fair to students if you really want them to succeed. And then finally, make it about them. We all know the radio station WIIFM. It's what's in it for me. So making it about them is, again, and I know this is a lot of words, but I wanted to give all the examples that she provided us at the summit with. So she talks about remembering the role of trust, is remember the first day of class when we talked about the role of feedback. I have some feedback to share with you that may be difficult to hear. I'm glad that I can help meet your goal. This is another one, and she uses this a lot. She says when she's evaluating students in the clinical area, when you do this, it leaves me with the impression that whatever, you don't care, you're disinterested, and et cetera. And if she said, if I have that impression, it's likely that others may have it as well. And she shared that students have come up to her afterwards and said, I had no idea I was doing that. I had no idea that that was the impression I was leaving people. Also, giving them an out. If you are okay with people drawing this conclusion about you, then keep doing what you're doing. If you're not comfortable with people potentially drawing this conclusion, you may want to consider a change. All of these are great samples or examples to use for behaviors related to like professionalism, role development, or role internalization. And so really it depends on what change you want to make to see for your students. Approaches can be adapted for more sensitive issues. I need to talk to you about a sensitive issue. Again, frameworking it right from the beginning, rather than that, oh, you're doing good, but I have something bad to tell you. I've noticed, or it's been brought to my attention, that you have a strong body odor. I'm concerned because it can affect your clinical practice, etc. Also, let's chat a bit about this and see what we can do to address it. I would really hate to see others not be able to see all you have to offer. Again, it's really that philosophy of showing them that the feedback you're giving is in hopes of achieving their goal, and that would be a highly competent nurse. Or a highly competent whatever they're going to be. So this could be certainly adapted to any educational arena. And really use the opportunity to foster student development. And that's her whole premise is to provide feedback in really timely ways, and then maybe in short chunks. It's time consuming for faculty for sure, but they found that this approach really has fostered student development, and they've had quite good successes, and probably a lot less frustration on the faculty side, because I know I can get real frustrated when students do not use my feedback. And finally, is the documentation, is making sure that if you are documenting your feedback, that you're giving, what you're saying is what you mean, and that the student understands that. The mantra of constructive feedback really is giving feedback as a process that starts on the first day of class before any feedback is even required. It really is setting the foundation and then following through with it for the entire semester or session. I know I'm quick here, but one of the things I wanted to do is, I want to stop sharing for a second, is I wanted to share with you my personal experience with this philosophy. I did it all wrong, probably. I did not start it from the very first day of class. But what I did is, on this past session in week 1, probably out of 20 students, 10 of them really were struggling with their initial postings, and not only APA, but just in presentation as well. And so I started as I was preparing for this presentation, I started really self-reflecting on the way I was giving my feedback. So it took me a while, but I really wanted to make sure that I was providing them with the right ways of their change and why I wanted to see their change. Well, week 1, okay. Week 2, the same people had the same mistakes. There was absolutely no improvement. So I felt like one of those cartoon characters I had in my PowerPoint presentation of just pulling my hair out, because I thought, okay, we all know they don't read, but why aren't, it's feedback. I said, you know what, I'm gonna do something. So when I provided week 2's feedback, I said, put up an announcement, but I didn't write the announcement as I usually put week 2 grades are posted. I put feedback and grades. And I painstakingly created an announcement based on this philosophy. And I put in there that I was sure that when they went to nursing school that they were not there to be mediocre nurses. And I'm sure that they wanted to be highly competent nurses. And now that they were in the BSN level or program, I am sure that they want to attain the higher level of thinking that a BSN program is there for, to help them achieve their goals. And that, again, I used that, I was here, that my sole purpose of providing feedback was to help them achieve their goals. And I pressed send, and I said, okay, here we go. So that was Monday. And I will tell you, how each group has their own kind of group norm. And for this group, for the last 2 weeks, I would have 2 or 3 people post their initial posting on Monday, 2 or 3 on Tuesday, 2 or 3 more, 5 on Wednesday, and then the rest on Wednesday night. And I sent that out Monday morning, that announcement. And Monday afternoon, I went on, and there wasn't one posting. I said, okay. So Monday night, I went on, and there was not one posting. Tuesday morning, I went on, and there was not one posting. Tuesday afternoon, I went on, and now I'm getting nervous. So the silence was deafening. And now I'm thinking, okay, all my student evaluations are going to go right down the tubes. So finally, Tuesday night, I got 3 postings. And one of the postings was from a student the last 2 weeks who had done very poorly, just on the whole presentation, APA, everything. I think she got in the 70s on both DQs. And I said, okay, well, here goes. Let's see what happens. And I opened her posting, and it was almost perfect. And she wrote to me and said, I want to thank you for the feedback. And I was like, phew, okay. Out of the 10 people who really did poorly on those first 2 weeks, on the 3rd week, there was improvement, significant improvement on 7 out of the 10 people. Now, the other 3, I figured they probably don't read my feedback. They probably didn't read my announcement. So I'm not sure how that would work, how that's going to work out. I did write a note. We do not have a DQ this week. But when I posted grades for the week 3 DQs, again, I wrote and thanked those people who, used my feedback. And I also addressed the students who did not use my feedback, but maybe to reconsider. Because my goal was to help them achieve their goals in attaining that higher level of thinking. So we'll see. But this is a very interesting approach to me. I felt less stressed afterwards, and by week 3, the improvement in the postings was, and believe me, I was not looking for that. I just thought even if a little bit improvement from 2 people, I would be happy, but 7 out of 10 had significant improvement. So it showed that, I don't know if they were using my feedback, but they certainly put in the effort. And I know I only did a half hour, but really what I'd like to know is kind of your thoughts about this type of approach, or what your challenges are, or some discussion, because this is a topic I think we all struggle with. And I don't think there's one clear answer to the question, but I just thought that this was an interesting approach.
I have a question.
Okay.
One of the things I find, teaching online versus clinical it's night and day.
It is.
Face-to-face interactions are really, for me, much easier because I can do the real close eye contact, yes. Make sure they're focused and hearing what I'm saying. But with the feedback online, the area that I struggle is I get to a point where I feel defeated, that I keep writing the same things and I send them personal emails and do you understand my feedback? And I keep saying the same thing. So do you have any tips on how to prevent that feeling of defeat.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this really helped. This changed my attitude when I actually saw that they made those changes, that they went ahead and used my feedback. And I don't know if it was because of my approach was different. I wasn't just saying, are you using my feedback? Are you using my feedback? Can I help? And I still do that. For the couple people who did not improve, I did still email them and message them personally and said, if there's anything I can help you with, I'm here to help. But I don't think we're going to reach everybody. For me, the fact that I reached that many in that one setting was really an eye-opener, and it made me feel so much better. So what I'd like to do, and not wait until the second week, but really go along with what Susan presented, is really sending that out the very first day of class. And maybe sending it out prior to when they have so much going on that they may read it, and maybe think about that, like, oh, okay, rather than getting it after the fact, and maybe setting that whole thing up. It is frustrating, and I was very frustrated. I hadn't had that many people out of a class do so poorly, and I thought, what am I doing wrong? How come they don't want to get better? But I don't know, that it changed me, and I'd like to kind of keep doing this and see what kind of other things happen.
Susan, this is Mary Pat, and
Hi.
The presentation very timely and extremely interesting. I tend to, and it might be the nursing that comes out, that you try and couch your comments in a therapeutic way. And this isn't really therapy. This is
right. Exactly.
This is delivering a message that's kind, but also direct. And also, I've always been, a beholder of the hamburger method. Again, it fits with, a part of our role and who we are. So I think definitely your point about delivering the message with the right language can go a lot further.
Yeah.
And, even when I do deliver it with that, hamburger method, they don't hear the good stuff anyway.
No, they don't.
They hear the part where you want them to change their behavior.
Exactly. So
anyway.
just leave out the other stuff. And that's what everybody, when I started looking at other, research, and even what Susan was saying is, if you say 5 things, they're just going to remember 1.
Right.
And it's the worst one.
Yep.
And that's what they walk away with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the emotions come in about, they're upset, they're defeated, they're angry, whatever else, entails that. But, so I thought that was a real interesting approach. And I thought, you know what, you're right. If there's one, but it means that you have to probably give more frequent feedback, and not to forget that you still have to give feedback when they're doing well.
Right. Well, thank you, Susan.
Okay.
Yeah, Susan, this is Marguerite. I really like that approach. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, being for those of us that are online, because students don't have that face-to-face,
right.
They can't read our faces. All they have to go on is what we're writing to them.
Right.
And when you look at the relationship between an instructor and a student, it's clearly an unequal power relationship.
Absolutely.
And many people have that experience of an unequal power relationship and may have a history of a very negative experience of that.
Yeah.
And I personally believe that for most students, and probably most people in general, we're our own worst enemy anyway.
Right.
To begin with. And I think what that approach communicates to the student is a care about them, that I want you to succeed.
Right.
And what I'm sharing with you is to help you succeed. And I really like the approach of starting that early on, just like we always talk about creating a environment of openness, even in the About Us forum, when we start out responding back to students. And I really like that approach for giving feedback. I think, I definitely would like to try that and see how it works.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't know, and I was feeling really, just like Landa said, you really feel deflated and depleted when you're giving all that feedback and no one is taking it, because I'm not doing it in a malicious way. We all want our students to be successful, but I don't know if we ever say that up front. And I said, I like the approach that she says it before any feedback is even given, and when their minds are kind of free a little bit. So thank you.
Susan, I have a question. Does she talk anything about sort of dialoguing with the students after feedback is given, and if there's an appropriate timeline? Like, I have a friend who teaches at Columbia. He has a 24-hour policy in his class where once he's provided his feedback back on any assignment, if the student does not agree with the grade or the feedback, which we all know happens a lot, he has a mandatory 24-hour waiting period because of that emotional factor, that you read it, you see that one thing, you see that number, and you can't hear any of the rest of that. And then you get the freak out emails, and the advisors do. And so I actually implemented that in my class. I put a big announcement and said, this is kind of how I like to work. If you have a concern or question about your feedback, your grade, please sit with it for 24 hours and then formulate your argument for why you feel you earned these points, as opposed to me, because I was in a position where I always felt like I'm defending your grade as the faculty member. And I felt like I was that defeated, deflated, defensive thing. And I didn't know if she had any insight into if there's an appropriate time period, or and I've done a lot more with follow-up phone calls. And I think in the online setting, like Marguerite said, it gives a more personal approach in the absence of this sort of face-to-face that a lot of our students, I think, need.
She did not. She didn't give a specific time frame. I think it depends on what type of feedback you're giving. Is it a clinical issue? I mean, she's talking about pre-licensure students, so she was talking both about clinical as well as the classroom. It seems like they have a pretty good open policy where faculty, that lines of communication are open, because of that culture that they kind of instill in the students right from the get-go. And so if students don't know or are angry, or they do come back, and they can go to their advisor, or they can go back to the faculty member and talk about it. But it didn't seem like there was any specific, she did not talk about that.
I have found that it does take some of that emotional edge right off of that initial reaction and that knee jerk of like, how did you give me an 80 when I worked so hard on this, as opposed to maybe I didn't earn all of those points because I didn't bother reading your feedback because I just saw that number and I freaked out. And so we just had a situation the other day with a student who was very emotional and fired up, and but then called, and by the end of the conversation is going to bring home a positive graduation. So she needed that connection to be able to hear that feedback, because she couldn't hear it otherwise. But I didn't know what the appropriate kind of time is after we do that.
And and that could probably just be a personal thing. Give them that 24-hour cooling off period.
For all of us, like for everybody.
Right, exactly.
If you get a bad paper, sometimes you go, oh my God, did you not listen to anything I said last week?
I think we can all say the same thing about an email that we receive, or and go, what is she talking about? But if we go back and reread it, sometimes it has a different connotation.
So Becky's talking about, do we also focus on that when we get our course evals? Like as, Becky, are you asking like as faculty, are you understand like when we read our negative comments from our students that didn't love us in our eval? Is that? I don't know if she's typing or not.
She said yes.
That's what she was talking about, though. Like, you know, we talk about students focusing on that one negative comment, but as faculty, don't we sometimes do that as well when we get our course evaluations? When we see that on there, and we tend to focus more on that than the 5 positive comments that we've had or the feedback we've gotten through the.
Yeah, I think it's human nature.
Right.
It's absolutely human nature.
Susan,
Yes.
this is Cheryl. It was, first of all, this is excellent. I mean, I don't think we can, you could have found a topic that was more applicable to everything that we do. 2 things I want to mention. One thing is that I have found that in giving positive feedback, that while we all acknowledge it's important to give positive feedback, that I think it's important to take the time to identify just what is positive.
Yes.
And what students are doing positively. Because sometimes we say, you know, this was great, or, you know,
Yes.
on the rubric, even if we give individual, and then we go into, you know, there's a sentence on what they did well, and a sentence at the end about what they did well, and then there's a chunk
Right.
in the middle of what they didn't do well. And I think it's important to take those extra few minutes to really identify for them what they did well.
I agree. I always try to give them examples.
Yeah, so that we can.
That's what I really trying to do more because of since her presentation and doing that kind of that self-reflection and looking at that, hopefully that culture change of how we can change the way people see feedback.
Right. It's hard. It's hard for any of us,
absolutely,
no matter at what level, to hear that something wasn't perfect necessarily. And I do feel that it is important to go back to the student and be there for clarification and to say, you know, not necessarily, you know, how does this make you feel kind of thing. But to focus in on what the issue is, and do you need more explanation for this? Does this, you know,
exactly.
Or clarification.
Exactly.
You know, and as you said in the beginning, some students are coming from environments where they never got this, and they don't even know what it is to have feedback. They don't even know to look. I have a couple non-matrics right now who are telling me that from the environment they came in, they're not used to teachers responding.
No, I have to say I was a little taken back when I was reading a couple of their articles, and that came up a couple of times where students said, but I never got feedback before. I just got good job or nice job, and that was it.
Right. So they don't know, you know, so part of this is also teaching and showing another model. But I think it's great to give this, to set the climate when you're not giving feedback. I really, really like that idea, whether we put it in our tips for success at the beginning, or a separate announcement, or in our video that we give for introduction, or we can mention it then. There are different ways of doing it, but I think it's a great idea to do it separate.
Yes, I really do think it needs,
so they know what to expect.
I don't think it should be sandwiched into all the other things, because I think it's so important that it needs really to be a standalone, however, announcement, or like you said, a video or whatever.
Right, right. Well, anyway, thank you. It was excellent.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else's thoughts?
Susan, I think you should consider providing this for the full campus lunch and learn.
Well, I think it was offered to everybody.
It actually is, and I will say for Aileen and Kristen, who are not nursing faculty, thank you. I will make sure you guys get the link when we finish recording this. But we always love when people from outside of our department come to relevant topics, and we're happy to branch out. So, but I agree. I think it's a topic that could be well shared across many disciplines, I think.
Unfortunately, you're backing up against another one right now that the vet group did. So I think you may have had some competition today.
Oh, okay. That happens. But at least they have the recording if they wish to go yeah.
Thank goodness for technology.
I know.
Does anybody have, and Susan, I'll just tell you, I appreciate the part that talks about sort of the humanistic approach to it, because for our on-campus faculty, they see their students. And for those of us that are online, some of us don't see our students until graduation, and some of our students don't put up profile pictures, and, we don't see them. And I had a student say the other day, I'm glad we got to talk, because I really just thought you were one of those professors that just phoned it in. And I thought, wow, we even in this program, there's some perception of that. And I had one of our statistician faculty recently share that she sat on a dissertation committee, and there was a case of beer on the table behind the student that was defending. And at the end of the defense, and he was all signed off, somebody on his committee said, his like third reader said, I just need to ask, what's with the beer? And he said, well, on page 127 of my dissertation, it mentions the beer. And if you mentioned it, you could walk out with it today. And so it just kind of spoke to that idea of you don't read everything and you don't see everything, and takes away that human approach. That student did, shock his committee. I hope they had already signed it before he did that. But it's that perception of how much is too much and how much is personalized. And
I think sometimes we do have to be careful about quantity that we give in the feedback, because I know for myself, when I've gotten feedback and it's just sometimes so overwhelming because there's so much, it's like, where do I begin? And for our students, it is, where do I begin? So sometimes I think we have to kind of prioritize our feedback and say, okay, what is maybe the most important thing for the student to change in the next week or 2 or 3 weeks or whatever.
Well, and I think knowing your own barometer is good too. Like sometimes when you get a run of really challenging assignments that you're grading, sometimes it's time to just shut the computer off and walk away, because it might be, that 5th paper that just doesn't get that APA right. It might just be the paper that pushes you over the edge. And I've actually sent feedback to students recently that said, I have some feedback about your paper. I'd love to set up a phone call to discuss it, because the pros and cons were not equal, and it was going to be a really overwhelming thing to write and read. And so when there's more ink on the paper from me than them, I think sometimes phone calls are a little easier, and I've gotten better at it. And I think it takes some of that dehumanization away with that writing.
And I think it also takes away the idea, if they're reading the feedback, that they are not going to misconstrue the feedback,
right?
Or the perception of the feedback.
Again, it goes to that absence of tone, because I can take it one way and the student can take it a different way, and then they think I'm being curt or short with them, when really it was just a quick little, oh, don't forget kind of thing for me, but they interpret it differently. And because they don't have that tone, it's really hard. It
is. I think that's the really key missing point. So that's why I think the written feedback that we do online is just so much, it's so important that we kind of get it right. Or do it differently.
Right, and I've used a lot of the audio feedback, especially in senior practicum.
Yep.
Given just the grading rubric, but then really explained it to them in the voice recording so that they can get that inflection and that tone and can give them.
Yeah, and it's really about the tone. Yep. Yeah.
Any other questions or dialogue for Susan? We have a couple more minutes before we wrap up and let everyone get back with their day.
I just want to say thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. This was really helpful, and I think it's a great dialogue to start having. And I'm sure somebody on campus will be asking you to do this at our professional development campus-wide come fall. So, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.